I'm not saying anyone could get into the UFC now, but it does seem like the UFC roster has both like their main professional high level fighters
Mhm.
and like their developmental league all together.
Yeah.
It would literally be like having all the teams in the NBA's G League also playing like
Yeah.
the Warriors and the Lakers. All right, welcome to another episode of Two Fight Fans, where we talk about all things in combat sports. I'm one fight fan, Colin.
And I'm the other Stuart.
Yeah, and today there's not much news that's been coming out here, so we
Oh,
got
man.
no. Well, there's one rumored fight. Charles Oliveira versus Alexander Volkanovski. First thoughts if that's a real fight, if that actually happens, what do you think?
I think it's pretty good matchmaking. Yeah. Why not, I guess? Sure. I guess the weird thing is, if Volkanovski wins, does he get a third shot at Islam Makhachev? Like, I don't think that'll happen.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, isn't Islam already supposed to fight Arman Sarukian?
yeah. But I guess assuming Islam wins, does that kind of create a logjam at the top of the division? I don't know. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, that does kind of seem like it's what they're angling towards. I mean, because Charles Oliveira lost to Arman Sarukian, which wasn't a close fight, not a close fight. I don't know. I thought it was fairly competitive. It wasn't like, Charles Oliveira was knocked out or submitted or like beaten badly. So he's like, I guess he's still pretty high in the rankings. Alexander Volkanovski, like, I don't know. It just seems it does seem like they're kind of rushing to put either one of those guys. I mean, Alexander Volkanovski in particular, like back in title contention.
Yeah. Well, it's weird because it usually happens with champions where it's not until like partway through their reign that they get really popular.
Mhm,
And so Volkanovski saw a huge boost in popularity after I think the Korean Zombie and Yair Rodriguez fights.
mhm.
Uh, and then he got really popular right at that tail end of his championship run. And then he lost to Islam Makhachev and then got knocked out by Ilia Topuria. So they never really got to capitalize on his sort of pay-per-view stardom. And so it
Mhm.
sounds like they really want to try to get him back to a title so that they can start throwing him on main events places.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of weird. I was hoping it would have been Dan Hooker against Charles Oliveira. I think that fight makes a little bit more sense, but this isn't a bad fight. This is one of these weird fights where it kind of reminds me of Max Holloway and Justin Gaethje. Divorced from its like amazing ending, it's like on paper you go like, why are we making this fight? Like
Yeah.
it's fun. I don't mind it, but this seems strange.
Yeah, like what does it do for the standings and rankings and whatnot?
Yeah, and maybe it has something to do with Ilia Toporia's come out and said like probably the winner of Diego Lopez and Brian Ortega at UFC Noche Riyadh Season Sphere Dome card.
Mhm.
That will be a number one contender fight for the winner of Ilya and Max. So there had been rumors that Alex had been promised a title shot after Max Holloway, so this maybe sounds like a get busy fight, but maybe he said like I don't want to wait around and I just want to make a full-time move to 155. Um,
Mm.
I don't know. But again, it feels like if you're gonna do Volkanovski against like a top five in that division, he should fight Justin Gaethje or he should fight Dustin Poirier. Um, if both of those guys are still planning on fighting, because it would still put him in a top five without knocking off like a contender who's ready to go. Because Charles Oliveira is probably only one or two wins away from challenging for the title again.
Mm.
Um,
You don't think that like okay, aside from, don't factor in like age or anything like that. You don't think that Justin Gaethje or Dustin Poirier are also like one fight away from re-challenging?
I don't think Dustin is because Dustin has lost to Justin
Islam.
Gaethje, Charles Oliveira, Islam, and Khabib, right? He's had 2 or 3 shots at the title,
Okay.
and has lost every single time. So right, and he keeps talking about not wanting to fight anymore, and that if he had won the title, he probably would have walked away. The
Yeah.
UFC hates that, so I don't think he will get one. Justin Gaethje, I also right, he's had 2 shots at the title, one against Khabib, one against Charles Oliveira, and lost both.
Mhm.
And then got his face absolutely obliterated by Max Holloway. So
Yep.
he also strikes me as like maybe if he beat Charles Oliveira and then like Dan Hooker, then he would earn a title shot. But he's also getting older and he has a lot of miles on him. So um, it's a weird thing at lightweight where we have these kind of like older action fighters who probably will never get into title contention again. Um,
But they're
just
still really highly ranked.
Yeah, but, like, nobody can really knock them off their perch, and that's where,
Yeah.
like, maybe Volkanovski could. I'd pick Volkanovski to have a pretty good shot against any of them. Yeah, that's why it's kind of weird to have 'cause it seems like such a layup to do Dan Hooker versus Charles Oliveira and go, like, that's a number 1 contender fight in this division. But who knows? But they might come out and say, like, Charles Oliveira versus, some Donkerson, then Alex Volkanovski is actually gonna fight, I don't know, the ghost of BJ Penn.
You know,
Anyway, what other
Alexander Volkanovski is the same age as Justin Gaethje, and
Yeah,
so
he's getting older. He's what, 36,
he's
35, 36?
35. Justin
Yeah.
Gaethje's 35. Let's see who else.
I think Volk has a lot less miles on his body and brain though.
Mm.
Right? Like
Charles
just
Oliveira's 34.
yeah. But I don't know. It's like those seem like fun action fights to have with Volkanovski up a weight in
Yeah.
that
Oh, they're
division.
definitely exciting fights.
Yeah. It's
But
just kind of weird.
but it makes sense. Like, I think Volk can beat anyone who's not in the top 5 at lightweight. So, like, this is like if he does decide to make a more permanent move up in weight. Which what do you think? Do you think he's a little undersized for 155?
I mean, he's like even a little undersized for 145, right? He's a pretty short, stocky dude.
Yeah, yeah,
In
that's what I
both
mean.
divisions. Yeah, I don't. I think he'd probably be fine. In both, yeah, in both weight classes. Like it didn't seem like he got out muscled by Islam Makhachev or like got bullied around size wise.
Mm,
Um, so yeah, I mean maybe like Jalen Turner, who's gonna tower over him, might give him issues. But like I don't think it'll be a matter of like oh he's just too tiny to compete
yeah.
here. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. But he could have fought at 145. Seeing him against Arnold Allen or I guess Mozar Evlov has a fight, but like Josh Emmett doesn't have a fight. Could have fought Josh Emmett. That's still like a
Mhm.
top 10. But yeah, I guess Charles Oliveira has kind of the sex factor. So
I mean, there is going to be a huge draw. So, but it is like, okay, let's play out the hypotheticals. If Charles Oliveira wins, he could theoretically say, like, I'm challenging for the title again, or
yeah.
you know, he could be another number one. It could be another number one contender fight, like against like Charles Oliveira versus the winner of Diego Lopez versus Brian Ortega.
But they're at 145.
Oh, they're at 145. So
Yeah. It would probably be him versus Dan Hooker, right? Because Arman Sayukin and Islam are going to fight. It could just be that Charles just gets the winner.
just gets
Yeah,
of
of
Arman
them.
Tsarukyan and Islam.
Yeah, because
Yeah, I can see that.
he was supposed to get the title shot, and he had to pull out, and that's why Volkanovski stepped in on short notice.
Oh,
And
right,
then
right, right.
it was a fun competitive fight with Arman Tsarukyan. So I guess you could say like, hey, he got another win over a very good fighter who many people considered pound for pound. Then you go, all right, well, Charles just gets the winner of Islam and Arman Tsarukyan, and either way, it's a rematch. They can go, ooh, look at what happened in the first fight, and then
Yeah,
yeah. But I think it would have made. I'm becoming you. It would have made a lot more nice, clean, canonical sense to have him fight Dan Hooker as
there
opposed
you
to
go.
Volkanovski. But yeah. Anyway, all right. Any other rumors or anything about fights? Not really. I don't really.
No. I mean, John Jones is saying like random like shit against Tom Aspinall on Twitter again. So
It's. Did you see Kevin Iole like going at Dana White and really pushing back against? Because Dana White has been so adamant that John Jones is pound for pound the best fighter, and
mhm.
finally Kevin Iole, who's like a known UFC shill, who basically is just like a wing of their PR, but who adamantly and fervently believes in pound for pound rankings and the sanctity of pound for pound, which is very silly. Really pushing back, being like, he's like, Dana White saying, "Oh, like John Jones fights anyone, he never backs down," and then Kevin Iole going like, "He pulled out, you canceled UFC 151 because he refused to fight someone on short notice when Dan Henderson had to pull out." There's been multiple times where you've criticized John Jones for not wanting to fight, uh, and like Dana White being like, "Yeah, but he always did fight, and he's beaten everyone." He's like, "Yeah, but he hasn't fought since like 2021. What are you talking about?"
Mhm.
Um, it was pretty good. It was cool to see Kevin Iole, who I thought was pretty spineless and just like printing whatever the UFC told him to print, uh, going at it because there's one thing he loves more than money. It's the discussion about pound for pound, and he just wouldn't have it anymore. It was pretty funny. Anyway, yeah, that's I want that fight to be done with. And the weird thing is we're getting close to November, and that's their big like crowning jewel at the end of the year, and they still haven't announced what that card will be.
That's true. Yeah, we are.
We're 2 months away.
Yeah,
And it's supposed to be like the first week in November, and like they have it. We know they're going to Madison Square Garden, and they just haven't said who's fighting on that card. What they usually they do like a small trickle of event like things, even if they
yeah,
take forever to announce the main event. But they haven't announced anything for that card.
that's
Um,
true.
I really wonder if it's just going to be like John Jones, or maybe they're afraid to announce John Jones versus Stipe. I don't know. But maybe it'll just be John Jones, Stipe, and then like a bunch of nothing, like an Apex card underneath it. They'll be like, this fight will
Just-
sell it, you know, kind of like the Michael Chandler Conor McGregor fight card that like
Yeah.
on paper had nothing besides the headliner. Um,
Ugh.
I know, but then we'll be done with it, right? 2025 will be brighter days when we don't ever need to. Though I'm sure Dana will change his tune in 3 seconds as soon as John retires, but John Jones will still be out there tweeting endlessly.
Oh yeah.
Um, but just
What
don't have Twitter on your phone.
What do you think the end of year fight will be? Because that's also usually a pretty big deal, and we've got like all the major like draws have already have like fights lined up.
Yeah.
Like, pretty much every champion is fighting like as recently fought or will be fighting
Yeah.
before the end of the year. So like,
All right. Well, let's noodle this through. Who hasn't fought this year that's on their roster that's really big? You would guess Conor McGregor, but I don't think he's actually going to fight.
right,
Um,
right.
and okay, what
Well, they're not
champions?
they're not gonna
Heavy.
do Pantoja because it's a flyweight, so they're not gonna put him at the end of the year.
I mean, they did it against Steve Ursig when they didn't have anything else, so it could be him.
Yeah, but
Uh,
that wasn't the like end of year card, you know?
yeah.
And Pantoja was like the headliner for the card after 300, so it was
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
almost an afterthought.
Well, maybe he could be the co-main event.
Okay, okay.
We've got a flyweight co-main event. I guess we haven't seen
Oh,
Zhang Weili fight
since
since
300,
300,
yeah.
so maybe her.
Wait, isn't it Islam couldn't Islam and Arman Sarukian fight because that's like at the end of Arman Sarukian's suspension for punching a dude in the audience?
Oh, but he said so in order to fight in December, or I think it was supposed to be October.
October, yeah. He had
Yeah,
to make a like anti-bullying PSA video.
yeah, and now that Islam Makhachev is injured, he's like, yo, fuck those kids. I hope they get bullied. And
Yeah,
he decided,
basically.
yeah, not to make the PSA video. I think they were targeting December, but Islam is pretty adamant that the recovery for his hand will like take him into next year. Um,
Oh,
but
okay.
Arman Saryukin has said that if he doesn't fight Islam, then the UFC might make an interim belt. So maybe you'll
Huh.
get Charles Oliveira versus Arman or Dan Hooker versus Arman for an interim title.
Mm.
Then that doesn't have a bunch of like cool, flashy appeal though. I'm trying to
No.
think. You could have Zhang Weili, you could have Pantoja, you could have that. I I I guess you could try to do if everything goes according to the UFC's plan and no one is injured. Kayla Harrison and the
Well,
winner of Pennington Pena could have like a quick turnaround if no one's hurt.
if no one's hurt, but they're fighting like in October, right?
Yeah.
That's a very
It's a
yeah,
fast turnaround.
yeah. I mean, maybe Bilal Muhammad?
Yeah, could do Bilal versus Kamaru.
That's also a
Again,
fairly quick turnaround.
yeah, none of these have a lot of like pizzazz.
Yeah.
Um, I have no idea. They're not going to go to South Africa at that time. I don't know, right? I think you
Yeah,
kind of run out.
right?
Maybe if John Jones retires on in November, then they're like, fuck it, and they put Tom Aspinall against someone in December for like and elevate him to undisputed champion,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
I could see
Um,
that.
could be that. Yeah. I don't know. They've done a poor job of like cultivating big stars to like get excited about.
Yeah,
Yeah. On purpose too, right? Like that's not what they're not in that business anymore. They just want you to buy their product regardless of what's in it.
yeah.
It's kind of like a trading card game where there's no cool trading cards. It's all
Uh,
everything is just the worst part of the trading card. Um, yeah. Anyway, speaking of the roster,
yeah. Yeah, you
after
read a
two,
stat that was shocking.
yes, after Tuesday with Dana White Contender Series, where they signed, I think, 2 or 3 fighters, the UFC roster now has 700 plus fighters. Um, just
Jeez.
for context, the NBA across all of its teams has 560 players. The UFC has 140 more fighters on their roster overall. Um, what do you think hearing that number for the first time?
That like I also okay. How many divisions are there in the UFC? There are one, two, three,
So like
six,
12?
7, 8, 9. There are 10. There are 10.
Okay.
Oh no, excuse me. 11. There are 11 divisions across, and 700 people across 11 divisions is what?
70 per division.
Yeah, so a little bit less than 70 per division. Obviously, not every single division has 70 fighters, so some are heavily favored in terms of just pure numbers. But just looking at that, that is like it explains why we have so many fights throughout the year. You know, like to get everyone at least one fight, like you have to have almost a fight every single week, you know?
Yeah. Yeah,
And
exactly.
on the for on if everyone was up at that level, then yeah, that'd be like pretty exciting. But the disparity in skill, not just between divisions, like we've talked about a lot, how like 170 above is almost like an entirely different sport when it comes to it. But
Hmm.
even within divisions themselves, if you have like the top 10 and then everyone else below that, like
Yeah.
there's a huge disparity, you know. And with the exception of some weight classes, like I'm thinking bantam, feather, and lightweight, like after, you know, 10 and below, it's like you're not what are you watching, you know?
Yeah. Oh man, it's like heavyweight's the worst at this, right? People have been saying that there's 2 heavyweight divisions right now. There's the ones like the 5 or 6 guys, that might be generous, 4 to 5 guys that could fight John Jones. And then there's a whole nother
Everyone else.
weight division. Yeah, that's like well, there's the gulf is so massive that it's like, well,
Yeah.
what is this? This is just guys fighting in the parking lot of the Piggly Wiggly, right? It's like it's not very good. um, it's yeah, it's too much, right? But that's really what this has just become is just a weekly fight, just a weekly fight machine.
Yeah.
Um, it's really hard, especially for I think newer fans and even fans kind of prior to 2000 like 15, 16. The UFC used to sometimes do like 30 events per year. Right? So it was what every other week just about.
Yeah.
Where now I think they have 42 to 45 per year, which is almost every week. And it's just too many events. And those early events or when they used to put on a lot less, it used to be something where every card had a really big name on it, right? It was like every card there was a really big name that you were excited to watch. It wasn't like, well, what's going on this time? Ah, it's an Apex, so I don't know anyone. What about the pay-per-view? Ah, there's one name I know. It was like every card had multiple fights. You're like, wow, this is really interesting because the roster fought a lot more as well. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
like
Yeah.
going through Anderson Silva's run, just seeing that in like 4 years, he blasted through like 5 or 6 fights, or in 2 years, he went through like 5 or 6 fights. I was like, oh, I forgot when champions fought almost every 3 to 6 months rather
Yeah.
than, you know, just kind of like once a year sometimes. Um, yeah. 700 is too much, man. It's too damn high. It's not good.
We're talking about that, and this weekend there's no UFC fight, but we're also, I mean, we're kind of thinking like, well, from our perspective, there's not much to talk about because there's nothing coming up. But also, like, I am thinking, oh, there's not any fights on this weekend. That's too
Hmm.
bad. I wish I was seeing, someone. But then again, if they did put on a random fight night like last week, like, oh, I don't care about any of these guys who are fighting.
Yeah.
So, like, it's a double-edged sword, I feel like.
Well, yeah, and like we kind of even talked about, like, they haven't announced that November card for John Jones, Stipe Miocic in Madison Square Garden yet, right? We just have had no news about it. And even we were talking about earlier this week, this UFC 306 card, which is their next big pay-per-view. There's almost no advertisement or like discussion around it that I'm hearing or seeing, right? There's not
Yeah.
a lot of actual fight promotion around it. Again, remembering back, every time there was like a pay-per-view, 2 or 3 weeks, sometimes 4 weeks out from the pay-per-view, they'd immediately start promoting it. They'd be
Yeah.
promoting the narrative. They'd have like, you know, they have UFC embedded now, but they used to have like the countdown shows. They would have all this extra packaging, and like everyone would be building up to the fight, usually because it wasn't just one fight on the card, right? It'd be like, imagine if you took the last two Apex events, took the main events off of those, and put them on the pay per view. So then you would have Sean O'Malley, Dvalishvili, Shevchenko, Grasso, then Burns, Brady, then Cannonier, Kai Bahalio, and Diego Lopez, right? It would be this super huge main card
Yeah. Yeah.
that you'd be excited about. And so you'd have all of those matchups to talk about leading up to a fight as opposed to spreading that out across 5 or 6 events. You know what I mean?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So yeah, they've stopped like actually promoting fights and instead just promote their calendar and go like, look, we have programming this day. But a lot of the time the programming is not as good, right? It'd be like if you're gonna like I'm turning into like Monday Night Football, and then it's like, today we've given only people 15 years and younger are gonna play quarterback, and you're like, why would I watch this? I would like to watch a professional athlete be the quarterback. It's a weird thing. Yeah, and then they have this contender series like every Tuesday, which I couldn't find the current stat, but in 2021. 22% of the roster was from Dana White's Contender Series. And that's basically the only way people get in to the UFC nowadays. So I'd assume 50% of the roster is from Dana White's Contender Series. And it's even become this thing where, like, it used to be that, like, if you were, like, the Cage Warriors champion or if you were a champion in some of these smaller divisions, you'd immediately get a UFC contract. Now they make you fight in the Dana White's Contender Series to even get a contract.
Well, there aren't really any like major organizations now. So you've got different like regional circuits or Asian or other like European, like very essentially regional,
Mhm.
organizations. And then it's like, okay, you got to the top there. Now you come to our like filter league or our, you
Yeah.
can even say our developmental league with either like Dana White's Contender Series, Ultimate Fighter, even the Asian Road to UFC.
Mhm.
And so then like supposedly you win these and like I remember how tough was supposed to be like, all right, we've got these people and now like you're the top of the prospects, so you get this great contract coming in now. But it's like
Yeah.
I'm not saying anyone could get into the UFC now, but it does seem like the UFC roster has both like their main professional high level fighters
Mhm.
and like their developmental league all together.
Yeah.
It would literally be like having all the teams in the NBA's G League also playing like
Yeah.
the Warriors and the Lakers.
Yeah. How many players are there on an NBA team?
You mean like actually on their bench and like or like on
Yeah.
their isn't it
Yeah, yeah.
11?
NBA roster is limited to 15 players during the regular season. Okay, so
Okay.
it would literally be like adding 10 new teams to the NBA,
Yeah.
right? And you can't pick any players who are currently playing in the NBA. You'd have to bring all new players along, right? It would definitely water down. You wouldn't have 15 highly competitive teams. You'd have a couple of suck-ass teams in
Yeah.
the NBA then.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's rough. I don't, and even we talked about like, hey, because I think featherweight and lightweight do have the most amount of fighters on the roster, though middleweight has
Wait,
quite
you
a
think
few.
featherweight and lightweight have the
I
most?
think I had seen that they had the most people on the roster of any division. Um, but remember, we watched that one Apex card that was like flyweights, bantamweights, and featherweights, and we were like, "Oh,
That's
sweet,
true,
look at
yeah.
this!" And then we were like, "Oh, whoa, these guys are not UFC ready. Whoa, this is this is the really bad part of the division." So, like, it exists for like when you have that many fighters overall, even the best divisions you end up starting to see like, "Ooh, we're not in professional. We're in like semi-amateur league."
Yeah. Yeah.
At this point. And it's just it's not worth it. And they need to cull a good amount of it and then give fighters more fights, right? I don't know who like it's hard on the body going through training camps, and so I don't know how many fighters do because especially like champions, a lot of these champions seem to only want to fight like twice per year. Um,
Except for Alex Pereira.
yeah, man, that guy'll just do whatever he wants whenever he wants. Well,
I
see,
mean, it helps when you take no damage in any of
yeah,
your fights and you end
yeah.
them in like one round.
And I've never heard of him having any I probably because he wasn't wrestling for most of his, like, 20s and, like, teen years, but no, like, neck or back injury. You hear about all these guys, especially the guys that are really heavy grapplers and have been, who are part of either, like, NCAA wrestling or the wrestlers out of Dagestan, and
Yeah.
their necks are just trash by the time they're 30. So it's like, yeah, then you need to rehab after every fight camp because your neck just absolutely gets demolished. Um, yeah, yeah, but 700 fighters too many, Cut them. It's too much. It's too much. It's too much. Yeah, yeah. I feel bad like saying like people shouldn't but also I don't know. Like, if I actually don't know because so many of these fighters now fight on 10 and 10 contracts. Um,
Mm.
like, would it actually save money to cut these people and then just like give higher purses to everyone? But I don't think it actually works that way because a lot of these guys are only fighting like once or twice a year.
Well, I wonder, like, with the tiers in their contracts, like, what is the distribution of fighters? Like, are most of them kind of in the middle? Is it like a bell curve where most of them are in the middle of like this? Like, what are the tiers? 10 and 10, 20 and 20, 16, 6, like,
I think it goes 10 and 10, 12 and 12, 20 and 20. I think once you hit 50 and 50, you're like about in the middle. Um, right. I think like you have a lot of people kind of keeping it there, and then you have like the champions that have a huge amount at the very end.
right,
But we know, at least from the court filings of the antitrust case, uh, a lot of those, like the big money makers, were from pay per view points or special contracts. Like Conor McGregor had a special contract,
right,
but like Francis Ngannou when he left the UFC as heavyweight champion and the highest paid heavyweight champion was on a 600,000 flat uh, purse,
right,
win or
right.
lose. So you're not really hitting like 2-3 million per fight unless you get pay per view points.
Yeah.
Um,
I guess I just like to see the distribution. Like, I see there's like general low tier, mid tier, and then these like special contracts. So like if the middle tier has the majority of the fighters, then like okay. But if it's like definitely slanted in like the lower one, then that's a problem too.
yeah, let's see. I could see if I can find it. I'd have to dig through the antitrust coverage, because
Right.
right, they had to turn over all those documents, and
Yeah.
so we
Yeah.
had it at some point. Most people were cherry picking out like how much did Conor McGregor make, how much did John Jones make, how much did Ronda Rousey make, um, because there is the argument to be made that like right, Conor McGregor and Ronda Rousey, especially in the 2015, 2016 era, um, their names alone probably generated more than 50% of the income
Oh
going
yeah.
to the UFC. And so even if they made $10 million, if the UFC made close to $1 billion in that time, they were the most underpaid, right? Because the guy who's the curtain jerker, who's just some random heavyweight, even though he's getting paid 10 and 10, he's probably not selling that much. So, um,
Right.
yeah. Anyway, it's yeah, too many people, too many fights. They're not treating them like again fights anymore. It's just become like rote. Hey, this is just how it's you know. Just watch our product. Just watch the
Yeah.
UFC, which is kind of a bummer because yeah, I kind of miss like the fight promotion and we were talking about even with like Israel Adesanya and Dricus du Plessis. I didn't feel any sort of like buzz around the fight leading up to it. Um, it just felt like, oh, yep, this is another fight card that's been penciled in, and this was supposed to be a big thing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. Anyway, well, that's all. That's all I got to think about. Unless you want to talk about Rocky.
Uh, I mean, you do owe a bet.
Yeah, and like I've seen it and I've watched it. So what's
What?
what I guess like what yeah, I this is a weird one because I don't have any sort of like negative rant to go on. I'm like, yeah, it's a good movie. Um right on.
So yeah, there's two things about it I wanted to try to talk to you about
Yeah.
possibly. So first of all, one, is it better than all the other? Is it actually legitimately a good fight movie? Is it even a fighting slash boxing movie? Like I know the later ones. I know the later ones are definitely heavy on the boxing. Like that's all it is. It's just him training and fighting, him training, him.
Yeah.
Um, but Rocky won because I don't think it was originally meant to be like a series here. Like
No.
the story is more about like this guy who's, trying to turn his life around and he's given an opportunity and what does he do with it? And the vehicle happens to be boxing, but there's tons of stories and tons of movies like this,
Hmm.
So is it really about boxing like how some of these other movies are about the sport, or is it about this one person like rising up?
I guess what I would argue is it's in the vein of an actually good movie. It is the story of like a person, right? It's a story of a character who's in a situation, right? It's not a story about a sport,
Mhm.
which is why a lot of these other movies suck ass because they're like the secret main character is just the moves you learn in MMA. Look, an
Right,
armbar, and you're like, well, that's not actually how you tell a story. Uh, like I could watch a documentary or a YouTube tutorial.
right.
So this is a movie about, but it is. I mean, when we even talk about like fight sports and stuff, we talk about kind of like the characters within it. Like, ooh, Israel Adesanya, he has these moves. He also has these like mental lapses. How is he going to compare against Dricus du Plessis? Right? There is a narrative that arises from the people. It's not just two faceless guys that it's not stick figures fighting, right? Who you're like, ooh, who is this? I don't know. Um, so no, I mean, this is a boxing movie. It is the trials and tribulations of someone just in a profession, but in the same way that you have movies about doctors or lawyers, like it is about like the unique stressors and pains that come along with like a very unique way of making a living. Compared to, like you said, like the later Rocky movies, which aren't even about like they're just there to be montages of Sylvester Stallone, juiced to the gills, like lifting weights. Um, yeah. So no, it's a boxing movie. It's just not.
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's I don't I like the later ones do turn into like what you would call like schlocky martial arts movies almost,
Yes. Yeah.
right? Where it's just like, and here's the secret technique, and here's the like, and then he's
Here's
got
the
to fight.
training montage.
Yeah,
Here's
and you're like, well,
the
this is kind of silly.
I
Yeah,
love them. I love them.
yeah.
Dude,
No,
early in
they're
my
fun for what they are, but they're
I'll
not good
I'll
movies.
I'll straight up tell you, early in my fight career, I would definitely watch those training montages all the time. I would watch Rocky going to wherever, Apollo's from to train and run on the beach. I watched him retreating into the Russian mountains to get ready to fight Drago. Like, I was all about it.
Is that the one? I can't remember which is the one where he's like going. Maybe it is. Is God, or is it like the really later Rocky one where Stallone came back in like his 60s? Not Creed, but like there was the Rocky
Oh,
one.
Rocky Balboa, where
Yeah,
it's literally like, the Mike Tyson Jake Paul fight where there's like old man who like
yeah.
is just minding his own business. He literally like he all it starts with him in a restaurant and then they have this like this new
altercation.
fighter. Yeah, they want
Yeah.
him to like come back and challenge for it.
It's so silly. There's one montage in that one where like the coach goes like, "Look, your knees are shit. You can't
Yep,
see
yep,
half the time. Your reaction speed sucks. So all we're gonna worry about is just making you strong as hell, so that you
yep,
can have stopping
yep.
power." And I was like, "Right on. I like that. That's good. Good."
This that was
Um,
great.
yeah. No, but those movies. I mean, I love the third one with Mr. T. But they're
I love
bad
it.
movies, right? They're cheesy bad movies. Rocky One is a good movie. And yeah, it's because it knows like there is drama and there is stakes added by like the fight, right? And like
Yeah,
those, it's very easy stakes to understand, but it's the story of a human preparing for a payday, down on his luck, trying to like fight back against the odds. Which it wouldn't need to be boxing. You could do this with any sport, right? But
yeah, yeah,
that's what makes it good. It's like a universal human story. It's not a is Rocky going to learn the secret technique in order to win a fight, which
yeah.
is
His technique is just I'm durable. Like
yeah.
I can absorb punishment.
Yeah, he Homer Simpsons it. It's good.
Yeah,
Yeah, but it's based on a real fight. It's based on it's Muhammad Ali against. I'm trying to figure out. I can't remember. Do you know it off the top of your head?
no, but I remember hearing about this because a big thing I want to talk about also was how this movie was, like how it came to be, I should say.
Hmm. Yeah, Muhammad Ali versus Chuck Wepner is the fight that apparently Sylvester Stallone claims to have watched, in which Chuck Wepner was TKO'd in the 15th round of his fight with Muhammad Ali. Uh, and he would, talked about how much heart Wepner had. Um, yeah, and like
Yeah,
nobody expected it to go a ton of rounds, and that like it was just Wepner's like durability and like grit to like fight overall. That inspired him to go like, oh, what would that life be like for someone who would be that willing to stand in there and like been knocked down multiple times? Like, why would you keep getting back up? And that's like an interesting nugget of an idea rather than it just being, I want to show people. Like a boxing movie now is like, I'm going to teach you the jab. And then like you learn what a jab is. And it's like, why are we doing this? Nobody
yeah,
cares.
yeah.
Yeah. But tell me, what are you interested about the making of this movie? Or what have
Well,
you learned that's got you so hot and bothered?
yeah. Okay, so I know you just said that like Sylvester Stallone was inspired because he watched the real life fight between Muhammad Ali and Chuck Wepner, but
Yeah.
like this story of how this was made is very similar to Rocky's life, or I can say Rocky's life is very similar to where Sylvester Stallone was in his life because,
Hmm.
like, okay, so first of all, apparently he writes the entire script in 3.5 days, where he like locks himself in a room and like blackouts everything so he wouldn't be distracted. He just like wrote nonstop, which
Yeah.
already like okay, pretty insane and dedicated, but whatever, you know. But then he like because he wrote it and he was like shopping it around, he wanted to be the one to act in it, you know, and all
Hmm.
these studios basically said like no, because one, you don't look the part, and two, you like can't fucking speak. So like all, all these studios were like turning him down and turning him down and saying no, no, no. And he was like, and he like Sylvester Stallone was like, no, I have to be the one to act in it. I like, and he didn't want to sell the rights to it. And actually, apparently, it's saying here that Henry Winkler was when he like he had taken like they had taken the script to some studio where they were going to turn it into a like made for TV movie, and basically like they had Henry Winkler had to argue on Sylvester Stallone's behalf to like basically get the rights back to the movie.
Hmm.
And at one point, like I Sylvester Stallone like basically had no money at this time, and he had a dog at one point and
Yeah.
sold his dog to some guy for I don't know how much, but just so that he could eat,
Yeah.
you know? And I think in the end, he actually, after the movie came out and Sylvester Stallone finally like actually gets a star in it, he turns out into this great hit and he wins Oscar and everything like that. Like he went back to the guy that he sold the dog to and bought him back for like $10,000 or something, some ridiculous amount to get his dog back.
Yeah, I'd heard that, like, yeah, he sold him for, I think it was like 500, 200, $500,
It was
and then he
something
went back.
cheap, yeah.
Yeah, and he had to, like, buy him for, like, $1,000, and it was right after he sold the rights, to it. Yeah, yeah, it's
But it's just insane. Like when I first saw this movie, I was like, okay, it's like it's decent, I like it, but then I watched all of them. But then hearing the actual backstory behind like how this like launched Sylvester Stallone into one of the biggest like names in the movies back then, like
yeah, well, and what's, like, he did write it in, the initial script in, like, 3 days, but, like, that's not the final script of the film,
oh
right?
no,
Like,
no, no, no.
they had other people come in, he, like, changed it, right? He got the initial, like, idea on paper and, like, kind of the beats laid out, uh, overall, which is impressive. But yeah, and then just being really, and God, like, he lucked out that someone finally, let him, uh, act in this movie, 'cause
Yeah.
this story could have turned out very differently, where just, like, he's never able to sell it, or it does become just a straight to TV movie starring Henry Winkler, and that's all that happens. Um, but yeah, it is a, and, like, I don't, he never acted in any, or, wrote anything again.
I have
He
no
wrote
idea.
Paradise Alley. I guess he wrote Rocky 2. He wrote Rocky 3. He wrote Rambo: First Blood. Okay, so I guess he did write more. I didn't realize that. Oh, he wrote a lot of these Rambo movies. Um, yeah. Yeah, and then he became, like, the biggest thing ever. Do you know where he got the nickname the Italian Stallion came from?
Oh, I did hear it in the story that I heard of how, but no, I don't remember.
He, for a very short period of time, acted in a pornographic movie, and his name in the pornographic movie, his porn name, was the Italian Stallion.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
That makes
man.
it even better.
Yeah. Yeah, no, a wild, right? Like, that's definitely one of those stories where, like, you hold it up as, like, look at the success you could have, but you also get a huge amount of survivorship bias when you hear that story, because 'cause you're like, "Oh, if I
Oh
just
yeah.
become poor and do this and stick by my vision, like, maybe I'll," and then sometimes it's like, "Hey, man, the screenplay sucks ass. This isn't Rocky. This is this is a bad screenplay, and all you've done is just, like, alienated yourself from everyone, uh,
Right.
trying so hard to get this made." But it worked out well for him. Uh yeah, it ended up, yeah, it's a pretty good movie, right? And, like, I think he had a really good, like, nugget of an idea, and, I mean, he did it again, like, rewatching the first Rambo. The first Rambo is a pretty good movie too. Then it, in the same way that, like, it just turned into, like, this insane franchise, uh, as Rocky, right? Then it just, like, it stops being even about the character, and it's more just about, like, look at the gun he has. Whereas, like, the later Rocky movies are just like, look at how training works in boxing, and it's like, well, that's watching the training is not actually that interesting or, like, engaging. There's that one point where he has that, like, robot, like, butler in
Oh,
Rocky
Rocky
2 or 3.
4. Rocky
Yeah,
4. Yeah, yeah.
and then, like, is it Paulie, his brother-in-law, like, yells at the robot and, like, kicks it or something? It's a it, what a weird turn those movies made. Um, yeah, I watched the first. Have you watched?
I watched the first 2. I watched the second one because it was basically the return of Ivan Drago, and I fucking loved it. I love the premise of it, I should say. So,
Yeah, I haven't seen them.
Creed 3. I did want to see Creed 3 and just see but I was entertained, I guess you could say.
Entertained. It was like an Apex card. You turn it on, you go like, all right,
Yeah,
I'll
yeah,
watch
yeah,
it.
yeah. I would
Very
like
good.
you have low expectations, and then every now and then it's like, I was surprised, so that made it better.
Yeah, I'm surprised you haven't seen Creed 3, because I had heard it's directed by, wow, what's the actor's name? Who plays Apollo Creed's son? He was also in Black Panther. Jordan.
Yeah,
Um, he
he directed
directed the
it.
the 3rd one, I think,
Oh,
and, uh, he's apparently a huge anime fan and, like, manga fan,
yeah.
and there's quite a few shots and, like, moments in those movies where you're like, "Whoa,
Oh,
this is not
inspired by
how."
anime.
Yeah, this is not how live action movies are made. This is how you'd film it for, like, an anime. Um, so I figured you'd be into that, but, yeah. I don't know, a really weird series, especially coming from like a 1970s movie, um, uh, that like was very like gritty and grimy and realistic, and then later he's running in the snow to like 80s glam rock, and then like
I'm with it. I'm with
yeah,
it.
Drago is
And,
this weird like machine guy.
and I love it was supposed to be about like, hey, like the American does it the right way, not against the Russian who is all up on steroids and like
Oh yeah, and Sylvester Stallone is absolutely
juiced to the gills.
juiced. Yeah, um, it's got Dolph Lundgren. I like Dolph Lundgren.
Yeah.
But yeah, what a weird way that
Franchise world.
yeah, yeah, because yeah, the first movie doesn't even feel like it's part of the same series.
Yeah.
Right, it's right, like you said, it's almost if you cut out the boxing in that movie, like the actual like boxing fighting, um, it's what 5 minutes shorter. Right, there's not much actual boxing within the movie. It's much more
Mhm.
about like somebody preparing. It's kind of like Raging Bull or something, right? These other movies that are like considered high cinema that are about fighters. It's the MMA movie should take a lesson. It's not really. You don't need to just have like bad choreographed fight scenes constantly. You can,
Mhm.
yeah. Anyway, and Carl Weathers is great in them. We love Carl
Yeah.
Weathers.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
passed
Yeah.
away recently, but he's phenomenal. Yeah, he's juiced to the gills too. It's great.
I mean,
They're
everyone is.
very, I know, very juicy movies. Very, it's like that in Predator and like other Arnold movies. It's just big beefcakes doing stuff.
That's the way it should be.
Yeah.
Come on.
Anyway,
Have you seen Hugh Jackman in fucking Deadpool and Wolverine? He's like 50 something and he is more jacked than I've ever been.
I know more Jack than almost any human will ever be. Um, it is interesting. I am wondering, talking about like, I mean, we won't divert into the bigification of all of the male actors in Hollywood because they just seem to getting bigger physically.
Well,
But
same
there's
with fighting. Like they're all just fucking
yeah,
huge.
yeah. I will be interested if like at some point because every time I see The Rock in anything, he's just bigger. Like at some point there has to be a mathematical equation to where he's like a dying star. He gets so big that himself.
Uh,
Like he's just too physically large. Because every time I see him, he's just the biggest man I've ever seen. He's
yeah.
huge. And I thought as you get older, you're supposed to like shrink slightly, but that is not the case for him. Um, he just keeps getting massive. Um, can you think, talking about like boxing movies, and I guess good boxing movies, can you think of a better boxing movie than Rocky?
A better boxing movie than
Yeah.
Rocky.
Like candidates might be Raging
Raging
Bull,
Bull? Yeah, I was gonna say
yeah,
Raging Bull.
$1 Million Baby,
Oh yeah.
The Fighter.
Oh, we should talk about The Fighter at some point.
Yeah, that one's a good one as well.
Okay,
Um,
I didn't know if you liked it. You liked it well because it has Marky Mark in it, but it does
yeah.
have Christian
Well, look,
Bale.
Marky Mark is an objectively horrid human, but he's he was fine in the movie. He was Marky Mark. He looked angrily confused the entire time, and that's his deal. Yeah. So, but yeah, again, those movies are not really about boxing, right? I guess they really hammer home that what's the phrase that they use in that head body head to
Yeah,
talk about how Mickey Ward would punch, which is like a little like you're like, okay, I get it, head body head.
but it's almost. I mean, Christian Bale steals the show like in any movie
Yeah,
he's in. So it's more about like him. I feel like.
yeah, absolutely, right? It's about the effects of fighting and like what it does to someone's
Yeah,
brain as you get like jacked up. Um, Same thing with Raging Bull is actually just about like how unstable humans are that like decide to go into fist fighting for a living.
I guess same $1 Million Baby you could say too, and like
Yeah. Well, that one's also got like such a weird ending where you're like, "Well, okay, what a weird."
yeah,
All right. Um, yeah. It's what it kind of reminds me of is like uh to use like a different quote unquote sport analogy. Remember in Casino Royale when they're playing poker and
okay.
the one dude, anytime anything happens in poker, just in case the audience doesn't know how poker works, there's that like one guy who's like Bond's sidekick keeps leaning over to the woman and being like, "He has a pair. That
Oh,
is
like
better." That
explaining. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and you're like, "Shut up!" Like, if I don't know how poker wins, I'll just like react to how the humans are reacting at the table and who's getting the chip sliding over. Like,
Right.
you explain to me a pair is higher than not a pair. Thank you. Thank you. I get it. It was so bad. And that's what a lot of these fighting movies and boxing movies do is they go like a jab is used to start a combination. And you're like, shut up. Shut up. Let me just watch it. I'll figure it out. And Rocky remembered that it doesn't actually matter about the fighting. It doesn't actually matter about like if you understand fighting. When the person falls down and they don't get up, that's all you need to know.
That's all you need to know. Just hit the other guy more and harder.
Yeah, exactly. And like you can kind of get a vibe of how what's going on in the movie that way. You don't need to like spend all this time being like, I'm gonna teach you what boxing is, because that's boring and lame. You can go sign up at a gym, and as we've talked about with MMA, learning things is stupid. There's no point in learning things. You should just be big and strong, which Rocky eventually learned. Just be big and strong. Yeah. Anyway, no, Rocky, very good. Yeah, it's. I don't know if I'd call it the first fight sport movie. There were a lot of other like boxing movies earlier on, and professional wrestling movies. That was like a big thing in like the 1930s, 1940s Hollywood.
Right.
Like really schlocky wrestling and boxing movies. But yeah, the first like really really good one, I think. Yeah, much better than Never Back Down. Much better than any
Much better than
MMA movie.
Bruised.
Yeah, yeah. It's yeah. Again, MMA movie should take a lesson. Like, just make it about what it would be like to be a UFC fighter, making 10 and 10, having to drive Uber Eats, and then go fighting in the UFC. Right? Like, but that's the reality that's interesting. Not did they learn the spin kick? Right? Did they learn the secret like guillotine choke? Ooh, yeah. Anyway,
All
this
right.
has been Two Fight Fans podcast. I'm one Fight Fan, Stuart.
I'm the other Colin.
And yeah, we didn't have much to talk about this week, but we filled some airtime. And next week there is the one championship event, which we'll talk about because it's primarily Muay Thai and grappling, no MMA. Love to see it. And then next weekend we have another UFC Apex card. Golly,
Hey,
Burns.
and don't forget, Inoue fights next week.
Oh, that's right. We do have Inoue fighting next week, so we can talk about whatever sort of like thunderous, murderous punch he finally lands on TJ Doheny. Man, I saw something about Inoue. Like, he benches like an ungodly amount of weight for such a tiny dude. That
Wait, does
guy,
he?
yeah, his body, like listening to the compound lifts that guy does, like the amount of weight that guy can move around for being so small, his muscles must be like the densest objects in the universe. He seems so freakishly strong, and that's probably why he has such insane punching power. Because he just can generate a lot more force than these other dudes. The technique is good, but like just having muscles like iron cables probably helps a lot. So yeah, there we go. Three fight cards next week. We won't be talking about rumor mills or complaining about the size of the UFC's roster. Now here's the question about the UFC's roster. Literally somewhere on that roster, there has to be the 700th best fighter in the UFC, right? There has to be somebody right at the very bottom of skill level in the UFC. I think for the rest of the year, we should keep our eye out and to see who we think might be the 700th.
Who's the worst?
Yeah. Well, not the worst, the 700th best.
Right? All right.
Let's be nice. But let's like who is number 700 in the UFC? Because we know who number 1 is. Once Max and Topuria fight, right? Whoever wins that is number 1. Great, and then I want to find number 700. That's my goal. I want to find them.
All right.
Yeah. That's and then we should make a movie about them in line with Rocky. Yeah. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.